In a common parlance, when we talk about secured creditor, we will say that a person in whose favor a security is created is a secured creditor. For example, an individual lends money against a mortgage of a property, and that individual takes a registered mortgage in his favor. He is a secured creditor. Now, for the purpose of enforcement under the SARFAESI Act, he may not be a secured creditor because the Act by definition says certain persons who are secured creditors for the purpose of the enactment. Now, under the certain persons, the definition of the secured creditor, first category is banks. They recognize banks as a secured creditors. When they speak about banks, they say nationalized banks, scheduled banks, subsidiary banks, and other banking companies as recognized by the Companies Act as well as the Banking Regulation Act. Then second category. Now, one more thing which has also happened is that within the definition of this bank, by way of an amendment, in fact, they brought in multi-state cooperative banks also, cooperative societies banks also. This was one issue of a litigation which had happened by way of a challenge, which I'll take you through in the later part of the session. So within the category of bank, you have about 6 different areas. Then you have financial institutions, which again is a specified definition under the enactment. The financial institutions, primarily they look at public financial institutions like statutory bodies created by the state. And they also look at financial institutions in terms of Companies Act, where specific financial institutions as recognized by Reserve Bank of India is also considered. Then in the category of financial institutions, the enactment specifies that such other institutions which are carrying out financial activities, which are notified by the central government of India for the purpose of being recognized as financial institutions to exercise their rights under this enactment. So this is one category which a delegated power is given to the central government saying that you can notify certain institutions to be also financial institutions. Now, under this category, in fact, starting from 2015-2016, central government came up with various notifications, bringing in huge number of non-banking finance companies, huge number of housing finance companies. Today, if you see, the figure is so astronomical that the total number of this category of financial institutions which are permitted to enforce the SARFAESI Act is standing at a number of 196. I will in fact bring you the that notification of central government in 2016, which shows about 196 companies have been notified as a financial institution in terms of section 2M, where the definition of the financial institution is given. So they also fall under the category of secured creditor. Now, these banks and financial institutions, they will fall in the category of secured creditor as they hold a right, title, or interest in a financial asset. So the enactment also defines what is a financial asset. In simple terms, I can tell a financial asset is nothing but a debt and receivable. If a bank has a debt to be recovered or a financial institution has a debt to be recovered, and it has certain receivables to be recovered in the nature of a financial transaction, all these things are defined to be a financial asset. In fact, it gives a larger definition saying that debt or receivables, and with an inclusive definition saying that any claim to a debt or receivables or mortgage charge. So everything is individually categorized within that category of financial asset. In a brief terms, I am putting it at everything related to a debt and receivables, whether it is a claim based on debt and receivables, whether there is a charge created in respect of debt and receivables, all fall within the category of financial asset. So these banks and financial institutions which have a right created in their favor in the nature of a financial asset, which is a debt and receivables, they are termed as a secured creditor. Now, other than these two categories, there are 3 other categories which are also recognized for the purpose of invoking SARFAESI Act. One is a debenture trustee. See, whenever there are companies which raise funds other than by means of raising loans, by issuing debentures, they create a debenture trustee in favor of whom the security is created for the benefit of the debenture holders. So therefore, a debenture trustee is also recognized as a secured creditor under the definition. Then debenture trustee in respect of debt securities. The enactment which was originally meant for the purpose of recovery of debts and receivables of banks and financial institutions was later amended to include cases of debt securities also. So in fact, the latest trend in that is that the government is in fact appointed a committee to examine the possibilities of setting up an exchange for the purpose of debt securities also to deal with the debt securities as in the case of financial instruments. So therefore, a debenture trustee in respect of debt securities is also a secured creditor for who is entitled to invoke the provisions of SARFAESI Act. Then other than that, the other category which is shown as a secured creditor is a trustee holding the securities on behalf of banks and financial. This is happening in cases of consortium lending. Imagine a situation where there are 5 or 6 banks which lend to a business establishment on a consortium basis. They create a multiple banking arrangement and they lend by virtue of a consortium arrangement with the establishment. For the purpose of creating securities, sometimes what happens, a security is created in favor of one institution which is called as a lead banker, and all other persons cede a charge as between themselves to hold it as a common security. Now, over the period of time, for the purpose of convenience, what the banks have started doing is that they identify a company which will act as a trustee. So on behalf of all these consortium banks, a security will be created in favor of a trustee. So therefore, such trustee is also recognized as a secured creditor. Now I said secured creditor is entitled to invoke the provisions of SARFAESI Act for the purpose of realization of the dues. Now such secured creditors, I said, is categorized as bank, financial institution who hold right interest on a financial debt. Then I said debenture trustee asset retainers. Now all these persons in favor of whom there is a security interest created by a borrower for the due repayment of the financial assistance is the person who is recognized as a secured creditor. So therefore, categories of secured creditors, and in their favor there is an interest created, and such interest which is called as a security interest created by a borrower. So on all these aspects, the enactment provides that such person, such secured creditor can invoke the provisions of this act for the purpose of realization without the intervention of the court. Now, when they said about this, the particular section which deals about this enforcement is section 13 of the act. Now, section 13, it starts in the first section itself, it starts with the word saying that notwithstanding section 69 and 69A of Transfer of Property Act. You are well aware that section 69 and 69A of the Transfer of Property Act speaks about the rights of a mortgagee for sale of a property without intervention of the court if there is a provision in such mortgage deed. So therefore, the Transfer of Property Act provided the specific right if there is already a covenant as between the mortgagor and mortgagee. So this section 13 of the SARFAESI Act says that notwithstanding anything provided in the section 69 and 69A of Transfer of Property Act, the secured creditor is entitled to invoke, and all other things which I said will fall in place. So this is the first enabling provision of the enactment. Now, once it provides for the enforcement of security interest by the secured creditor, the Act also provides a mechanism or a modus by which how this can be done. At the first instance, by section 13(2), the Act says that a person has to issue a demand notice to the person who is in default of such secured debt. So therefore, a borrower who is under liability to the secured creditor, namely the bank or financial institution, under a security arrangement, if he commits a default in payment of such secured debt, then the secured creditor is bound to issue a demand notice to him, giving a period of 60 days time to enable him to discharge that liability. So this is provided under section 13(2), which is the commencement of the enforcement of security interest. Now this speaks about default. Now when this subsection speaks about default, there is a definition of this default under the Act in terms of section 2J, which says if there is a non-payment of debt or amount payable by the borrower to any secured creditor on the account being classified as NPA, rather non-performing asset, and non-payment of debt with respect to debt securities with a notice of 90 days, so on so. So therefore, to enable a secured creditor to enforce this right by issuing a demand notice under section 13(2), what is required to be seen is that there should be a default in payment. Now, such default also has to result in the account being classified as a non-performing asset. So this is the basis. That is the reason at the first instance I said that a small understanding as to what is a non-performing asset is required. So only if there is a classification of NPA, that comes into place. Now, if there is a default and there is no classification of NPA, or default is such a nature that within the period of the account being classified as NPA, the person is able to again service the loan, then the question of enforcement under the SARFAESI Act doesn't come. So therefore, a default and which results in the classification of NPA is essential to be done. Now then it speaks about of a secured debt. Now there is a specific definition for this secured debt also, which says, which is nothing but a secured debt is nothing but what is secured by a security interest. So ultimately it again boils down to the fact that what is a security interest? Because the enactment itself says that enforcement of security interest. So the security interest which is created gives right, which consequentially leads to one to other, saying that the security interest created leads to a situation of a secured debt being in place. And if there is a secured debt and there is a default, and if there is a default, then which boils down to a situation of classification of NPA. Now all these result in the enforcement, a right which is vested with the secured creditors to proceed with. So 13.2, when a demand notice has to be issued, these are all the factors which has to be satisfied. Now, once this is satisfied, the enactment requires, the provision requires that a demand notice to the person to be issued, asking them to comply with the repay the liability within the period of 60 days. Now, further procedures are also provided in terms of, now at the first instance, when there was a challenge to this enactment before the Supreme Court, this 13.2 demand notice was being contested on a ground that this is a show cause notice. So therefore, it can be a question of challenge. But the Supreme Court said it cannot be treated as a show cause notice. It is only a notice demanding payment. So therefore, Supreme Court said that when such notice is given, there is a scope for you to reply. There is a scope for you to raise your objections to the proposed action, so forth. So then amendments came which suggested that as and when a notice is given, you have to give a reply. And if the reply is being considered by the institution or the bank or financial institution, they have to send a communication to you whether they are accepting, whether they are rejecting, and for what reasons they are rejecting. So these, all those things are being provided. Now, given a situation when a demand notice is issued and thereafter the payment is not made, so that results in the secured creditor proceeding with the further measures under the SARFAESI Act. That is provided under section 13.4. Now, what is the measures which can be taken is one aspect, and who can take these measures is also one aspect which the enactment provides as a salient feature. One is that it says, though the secured creditor is entitled to enforce and proceed with the recovery of their dues, that action can be done by a designated person called an authorized officer. Who is an authorized officer is provided under the definitions under the rules and not the enactment, not the act. Now, such authorized officer, in terms of the rules, will be entitled to invoke the further rights of the secured creditor under section 13.4. Now, 13.4, what it provides for? It provides for 4 stages. One, it says that the authorized officer can take possession of the secured asset and proceed to lease, assign, or sell the same for the purpose of recovery. Now, the second situation it provides is that authorized officer can take over management of the business, including the right to transfer by way of lease, assignment, or so and so. Then the third situation is that the authorized officer can appoint a person to manage the secured assets after taking possession. Then fourth is a situation where the authorized officer can demand a third party who is liable to pay the borrower to make him the payment in discharge of this debt. These are the 4 situations which the section provides as an enforcement of the security interest. Now, once the secured creditor, rather the authorized officer exercising the powers of secured creditor, is provided with these measures for enforcement, does the enactment provide any rights or obligations will be the area which we have to look into. The Act provides certain rights and obligations also, which is on the authorized officer. At the first instance, let us see what are all the obligations of the authorized officer. Primarily, whenever there is an instance of an enforcement of a security interest under the SARFAESI Act, it can be only in terms of the procedure established by law. This is a very, very basic principle which we will all appreciate, that the law says that even a right to a property which is guaranteed under Article 300A of the Constitution it says that it can be deprived, a person can be deprived to a right to a property only by procedure established by law. So though the act says that there can be an enforcement of the security interest without the intervention of the court, it can be done only by means of a procedure establishment. Therefore, the act sets down, the act by means of an provision to make rules also brought in the security enforcement, security interest enforcement rules, which gives the procedures to be followed. Like the rules specify what can be the contents of a demand notice, how the demand notice has to be served on a party. Now, once it is served, what is the further procedure? Likewise, it also says that after completion of the process, given a situation, if the demand notice is not able to be served, a person evades, or that you don't find a different address now, you have sent it to the last known address and it has come back. Then the rules say that it has to be affixed in the regular residential address or the place where the business was being carried on. And it also has to be published in the newspapers. So these are all the procedures which contemplate. Likewise, in the case of taking over of possession, which is contemplated in 13.4, the four measures which I have said in 13.4, possession and takeover of management, appointing a manager to manage the asset which has been taken possession, then demanding for all these things also there is a procedure which is established. The rule speaks about the mode of possession notice, the nature of possession notice, what is the contents which is to be provided in the possession notice, and how this possession notice has to be served. See, effectively, if you see the niceties of this, when the enactment says that there is an enforcement of a security interest, taking of a possession, it actually deprives a person of a right to his property. So therefore, when we speak about a possession notice under this act, it actually means you are dispossessing a person of his right. You are rather putting him away from the property. So that possession notice format, and what is the procedure? Possession notice has to be delivered to the person who is affected by that measure. It has to be affixed in the property. It has to be published in 2 newspapers within a time period. So these are all the measures, these are all the procedures, which is an obligation on the part of the authorized officer for the purpose of enforcement of the security interest. Now, when we speak about the demand notice being served on the party, the obligation is that if there is a reply or objection to that such demand notice, you have to consider and you have to send a reply back to the person within a time limit. So these are all the various salient features or niceties of the enactment, which brought in a lot of jurisprudence in terms of challenges being made, and ultimately the rules or the provisions of the act in some areas being held as mandatory, in some areas being held as directory in nature. Then when it goes to the next stage, once the property is taken possession by the authorized officer, the further obligations are that it says that the authorized officer is bound to preserve the property. Now, likewise, when he is taking further steps for sale or lease of the property, the rules provide that there is a requirement of a proper valuation of such asset, and based on the valuation, an upset price to be fixed, and thereafter a sale notice to be issued. So then again, same type of procedure which is contemplated in terms of sale notice to be served, sale notice to be affixed, sale notice to be published in the newspapers. So these are all provisions which are there in the rules. So in terms of each and every measure which the authorized officer takes, there is an obligation cast upon him for compliance of certain procedures to be followed, which is the basis of the provisions of the enactment when it provides for the enforcement. Now, post-enforcement, it is happening. Does the act speak about anything on what happens if the asset is sold? Then it specifically provides under section 13.7 as regarding what is the manner of appropriation of the proceeds which is realized by the authorized officer. It has to be first appropriated towards the cost, charges, expenses incurred in enforcement. And secondly, it says it is towards the discharge of the dues of the secured creditor. Now, thirdly, it interestingly says the residue shall be paid to the person entitled thereto in accordance with his rights and interest. This I found to be a very salient feature because it doesn't say that you have to pay back to the borrower. Because in an enforcement, you may have so many claims which may come. You may have third parties who may have rights over the properties, which we have seen in various litigations happening. Therefore, the obligation on the authorized officer is to see that in terms of 13.7, when appropriation happens, the last portion is that residue shall be paid to the person entitled thereto in accordance with his rights and interest. Likewise, there are obligations in terms of joint financing. Suppose there are various institutions who have lent money and who hold a joint security. Now, what should be done by such institutions in joint action. The Act requires that in cases of joint financing, there is a requirement of a 60% in value of the amount outstanding on a record date to give a consent to take action. So they don't want to discriminate actions happening between different creditors and creating so much of issues. This is provided under section 13(9), which says in cases of joint financing, the exercise can be done only if there is a consent by 60% in value of the outstandings on a record date. This becomes it. Then in cases of companies which are in liquidation, the provision also provides for such situations as regarding distribution, which can be only in terms of section 529A of the Companies Act. Now, what are all the rights which the secured creditor has in terms of this enforcement? When we speak about rights, one primary right which came by way of an amendment is that the secured creditor themselves will be entitled to bid in the auction and purchase this property. But that can be done only in case of a postponed auction, which effectively means at the first instance in an auction, secured creditor cannot be a bidder. If suppose auction fails for want of bidders and there is a postponement and further auction happens, so in that case, the secured creditor is entitled to participate and also bid for the property. There are specific provisions which are provided under section 13(5)(a) to 5(c), which speaks about right to bid. Then it says they can set off the dues which they have to recover. And interestingly, it also provides that such property purchased by the banks will be subject to section 9 of Banking Regulation Act, which effectively says that banks cannot hold immovable properties which are otherwise for their business purpose more than a period of 7 years. Banking Regulation Act requires that any immovable property which a bank owns can be only for the business. It cannot own a property for some other purposes. So therefore, this also has to be complied with. Suppose if a bank bids for a property, it has to ensure that it either puts it to the use of the bank's purpose or it has to further alienate the property within that statutory period. Now, the further rights which are there is that on such transfer of this asset in favor of a transferee by enforcement under the section, how the right passes, it specifically records the fact that the right to the transferee in relation to the secured asset will be as has been made by the owner of such secured asset. So when a secured creditor, namely the authorized officer in terms of the enforcement, sells the property, the transferee will get all the rights vested as in the case of a owner having sold the property to him. This is provided under specifically section 13(6). Likewise, under the rights, you can also look at that the secured creditor has been provided a specific right to enforce the guarantees provided in respect of a financial asset without invoking the 4 situations under section 13(4). So though under the common law, we have always the liability of a principal borrower and guarantor is coextensive under the provisions of Contract Act, and by virtue of judgments of Supreme Court, we know that there cannot be a situation claiming that you first proceed against the principal borrower. But specifically, a provision is also made under this enactment saying that though there is a right given to the secured creditor to enforce the security interest, that cannot stand in their way. Suppose if they decide to proceed against the guarantor at the first instance. This is provided specifically under section 13(11). Likewise, by section 13(12), it also says that these exercise of rights can be by different persons also. So when we speak about the enforcement in terms of 13(4), we said about possession, takeover of management, then appointing a manager, everything. So this takeover of management is again provided by a specific provision, namely section 15 of the Act. So how a takeover of management can happen and consequences of such takeover of management. If suppose a management is taken over of a company by the secured creditor, now what the consequences flows, what will happen to the directors, what will happen to the rights of the shareholders is also specifically provided under section 15. It clearly records the fact that the directors will cease to be the directors of the company. Now the secured creditor who has taken over the possession, taken over the management of the company will be entitled to appoint directors. Likewise, it records the fact, dehors whatever is the provisions of Companies Act, any resolution of the shareholders will not have any effect after the takeover has happened. Now, how this takeover is provided is that if there is a case of takeover of management, in addition to the enforcement under 13(4), such takeover is recognized the day when a publication is made in the newspaper. So it again says that there should be two publications in vernacular and English language about this takeover, and the management will vest in entirety with the secured creditor. Now, post takeover of this management, what happens? In the process, if the secured creditor is able to realize their secured debt, by situation of either sale of certain portions or sale of the entire management, whatever it is. And if the business still continues, post realization of the dues, the secured creditor is bound to restore back the management to the borrower. Now, in cases where post takeover of management, if the secured creditor enforced its rights by transfer of shares, imagine in a case where the debt is converted into an equity, and such transfer of shares, it is protected, saying that even in case of realization, there is no requirement to restore back the shares. If it is done by transfer of shares, such transfer is final. So this is all what is provided under section 15. Now, when we speak about taking over a possession by the authorized officer under the Act, a question came before the court as to whether it is an actual possession being taken or a symbolic possession. On the basis of various then existing laws and the jurisprudence which was available, as well as the experience with different enactments, more particularly the enforcement of a mortgage right, the execution of a decree before a civil court, which normally will be a symbolic possession being taken. Only on the completion of the sale, you will be well aware, as far as the Order 21 of CPC is concerned, the attachment which is made by an executing court in execution of a decree will not be by takeover of a management, by takeover of possession. But in continuation of the attachment, if the civil court decides to put the property for sale and if the property is sold to an auction purchaser, there is an obligation to put the possession of the property in favor of the auction purchaser. So in all these backgrounds, a question arose saying that when it speaks about possession under section 13(4), whether it is actual or symbolic possession, that was set right by the set to clarity by the Honorable Supreme Court, saying that there is no dichotomy. It can be either symbolic or it can be an actual possession also. In a given case, if the institution is able to take actual possession, it will be permitted to take actual possession. In a case, if it is not able to take actual possession, still the exercise of the taking over of possession in terms of 13(4), which I said in terms of the rules by giving a possession, delivering a possession notice, publishing the possession notice, or affixing the possession notice, the exercise completion will effectively mean the person has been dispossessed of the property. So therefore, even it may be a symbolic possession, it still vests with the secured creditors. Now, if that is the situation, does the Act provide any mechanism where if there is a requirement to take actual possession? It actually provides for. That is provided under section 14. It is a section by which the Act enables the secured creditor to use the machinery of the state. Because the section says, in cases where a physical possession is required to be taken, an actual possession of an asset is required to be taken, and there is a resistance by the person who is in occupation of the property, the secured creditor, rather the authorized officer or the secured creditor, can petition the chief metropolitan magistrate or the district magistrate, as the case may be, seeking their assistance to take possession. So there had been again a lot of jurisprudence in terms of various decisions coming up on the action taken under section 14, because section 14(1) at the first instance says that it enables the authorized officer and secured creditor to file a petition before the CMM or the district magistrate. Now section 2 says that the chief metropolitan magistrate or district magistrate, after being satisfied with the contents, then pass an order or authorize his subordinates to exercise such right or power and to exercise such adverse powers also to ensure that the possession is taken, and on taking possession, he has to transfer the same to the authorized officer. Now, subsection 3 of section 14 said, no act of the CM or DM can be questioned before any court of law. So therefore, it was primarily seen as an administrative action, as an assistant by the state machinery to deliver possession. But in actual parlance, what had happened is many people realized their threat when this actual possession is taken. Like instances where when a possession notice is issued, people took it very lightly. They don't even go and challenge before the DRT in terms of section 17. But the day when they are dispossessed, they really felt that there was a threat to their right to the property. So therefore, they wanted to question. But 14(3) says it cannot be questioned. So this again led to various jurisprudence. And ultimately, Supreme Court in 1 or 2 cases made out a point saying that a petition being filed under section 14 is also a measure which is contemplated in terms of 13(4). Therefore, that action of petitioning the authority or an order being passed on the person dispossessed can also be seen as a measure, and which will be within the purview of a challenge before the DRT under section 17. Now on section 14, the few more things which have evolved from the original enactment to till date by way of amendments is that what kind of test situation should be there. Like any secured creditor, it goes, the earliest point of time, if you see in the 2002 enactment, 2004, 2005, a letter was being given to the collector, the district magistrate, saying that I need an assistance and orders were being passed. The letter did not even disclose what was the asset. The letter did not even disclose what is the right of the secured creditor. So this shaped into various amendments which said that an application has to be filed and the authorized officer also has to file an affidavit. The provision specifically said an affidavit has to be filed and the affidavit has to set forth, they gave about 9 points which said what is the secured asset you hold, what is the secured debt which is due to you, and when did the default happen. In terms of default, whether a 13-2 notice was issued, whether it was served or returned, and if there had been an objection, whether it has been considered. So like forth, various points were set down under the proviso, which has to be the compliances reported in an affidavit by the authorized officer to the district magistrate or the CMM. So then came an issue as to, in exercise of 14 power, can a third party who is in possession of the property be deprived of property? Case of tenants who are there, case of leasehold persons who are there. So this again went into various litigations and ultimately an amendment came. Primarily at the first instance, Supreme Court said that tenancy rights would be protected by a judgment. They said you cannot dispossess them. Though there will be a possession taken and the transfer happens, everything, all such things will be subject to the rights of the tenants. But in a later judgment, Supreme Court clarified that and saying that tenancy rights under the Tenant Act, the right will not be protected, but it will be determined, it will be tested as to whether the tenancy continues. So determination of the tenancy, whether tenancy tenure is over, and it was also tested on terms of section 65 of TP Act, whether the lease is valid, whether it is a registered lease, and whether it is in contravention of the covenants of the mortgage deed, and whether such lease or tenancy was created post-mortgage and in cases where post-issuance of 13-2 notice. See, in cases where apparently to defeat the rights of secured creditor, even after receipt of 13-2 notice, person used to put somebody in possession and claim that there was a tenancy. So these are all came by way of an amendment, and ultimately the Supreme Court said that only DRT will decide this issue also as to whether there is a valid tenancy or whether lease subsistence in the property. Now this again enabled the government to come forward with an amendment where in terms of section 17(4)(a), a specific amendment was made wherein the rights of the tenants was to be determined by the DRT within the parameters set forth therein. So these are all cases in which the physical possession to be taken and challenges which came in place. Now when enforcement happens and the realization happens, suppose if there is a shortfall in the realization, the secured creditor is not able to realize the entire money, whether that is the end as far as the SARFAESI is concerned. Like we see earlier, there is a original application filed under the DRT Act. So whether they have to go back to the provisions of the DRT Act or not. The SARFAESI Act also provided a specific section, namely section 1310, which said that in case of shortfall, the secured creditor still can approach the DRT for recovery of the balance amount. And such application will be under the specific section 1310, but in the format as provided under the DRT Act. Now, having said about the enforcement and the rights and obligations of the authorized officer or the secured creditor, now let us see what are all the rights of the borrower mortgager. In all these cases, the person who is affected is either the borrower or if there is a third-party mortgager who has mortgaged the property for the purpose of securing such financial assets. Now, does the Act provide any such protection for them, or does the Act provide a right or what kind of grievance redressal mechanism which is provided for the person who is affected by this enactment? So this has to be seen in the context of a kind of checks and balances which has to be put in place, because at all points of time, the concern is that any enactment should not be abused. If there is an abuse of provisions of law, there should be some mechanism by which such abuse is tested. So therefore, let us see what are all the rights of the borrower or mortgager in cases of enforcement. As I said at the first instance, the enactment by clear definitions set forth what is a security interest, what is a secured asset, who is a secured creditor. So therefore, as a borrower, only if all these things are satisfied, there can be a case by a person to enforce a right under the SARFAESI Act. Then the Act also provides if all these things are satisfied, then the further requirement, what the enactment says is that before enforcement, there is a requirement of a demand notice, which I said in detail when I said about the demand notice under section 13.2. So that is a right and protection which the borrower or mortgager has at the first instance. As a demand notice being sent by the creditor, an opportunity is given so that you can discharge your liability. Now, if there is no possibility of discharging the liability within 60 days, and you have an issue as regarding such enforcement, like a dispute that it is not an NPA account, a dispute as regarding the very creation of mortgage, or a dispute that you have not mortgaged this property for a particular financial asset, which the financial assistance which the institution is trying to enforce, rather it was in some other case. So all those things has to be placed by way of a reply or an objection to the 13.2 notice to the authorized officer or the secured creditor. Now, such reply, as I said in the case of Mardia Chemical, Supreme Court categorically said that has to be an objective consideration, and it has to be again communicated back to them as to what is the consideration of the authorized officer or the secured creditor or the. So this is one right which is available. Now, post this, you don't have much scope of objection, or you raise some objections and secured creditor rejects those objections and proceeds with the 13.4 measure. Now, at that stage, at the stage of taking possession, you have a remedy of approaching the DRT, questioning the measures, either on subjective issues or on legalities or on technical objections. Subjective issues, as I said, you may have an issue saying that there was no mortgage created. Or there may be an issue saying that there is some third party who is the owner of the property and who has not created any mortgage. So he comes and steps in and says. And in a case where there may be certain disputes on the amount, quantity, and on the legality of the actions. Once they seek to enforce under the Surface Act, they are bound to comply with all the statutory provisions, including the Act and rules. So if there is any violations, certain provisions are held to be mandatory. So if mandatory provisions are not complied with, take a case where there is no demand notice served properly, or take a case where that the 60 days mandatory period required to be given in the demand notice is not given, and even much earlier to that, an action under 13.4 by taking possession is given. So these are all the legalities which you question. Then you will have more technical aspects also. Defective 13.2 notice, defective possession notice, defective affixture, defective paper publication. So these are all certain rights which the borrower or mortgager has to protect their interest by way of an adjudicatory mechanism by approaching the DRT under section 17. Now, other than that, now after possession is taken, now still there is a scope for you to do something because you would like to retrieve your property, or you would like to save your business being ruined completely. Now, what is the provision? Now, the Act says, after having taken possession and before proceeding with the sale, there is a right of redemption which is available with the borrower and mortgager. Now, the mortgager can exercise this right of redemption by making the entire payment and seeking for redemption of the property. Now, this is provided under section 13.8 of the Act. Now, the original provision 13.8 of the Act provided that this right of redemption will be available till the property is sold or transferred. These two words are crucial. It said sold or transferred. Now, this again went into various litigations, like referring to earlier provisions of Transfer of Property Act, namely section 65, 65A, 69 and 69A, as well as provisions under the Civil Procedure Code in terms of execution. There were judgments of the Supreme Court to say that when the transfer comes to an end, if it's a sale and transfer, the issue which was pointed out is that sale gets a completion, only registration happens. Transfer gets a completion, only possession is delivered. So therefore, if a borrower was able to hold on to the possession, actual possession for a long period of time, this right of redemption period was being extended, or rather claimed to have been in existence till that last measure was done. But this again did not find favor with the banks and financial institutions, so as the government. Therefore, an amendment came in 13.8, which said that today the right of redemption is restricted only till the point of publication of a sale notice in the newspaper. So 13.8 today says that only till the date of publication of the notice in the newspapers. So therefore, till such time, there is a right of a person to have the property redeemed, rather discharge the liability and have the measures dropped at that stage. Now, other than that, in cases of sale, there is a mandatory requirement of 30 days notice to be given, and there is a mandatory requirement of clear 30 days from the date of publication. This was again Supreme Court interpreted in two cases, saying that even in the subsequent sale, second and third sales, same 30 days has to be followed. Now amendment came again and said that first sale is 30 days. For all subsequent sale, it is only 15 days, which is there. Now, as I said, when the borrower has a right to approach the DRT, what will be the normal things, the subjective challenges which he has, and the violations of the provisions, the act and the rules which he has, as well as the technicalities. So that I try to just classify. Because of time, I will just skip through. Probably I will give you these notes, which will give you about 17 instances where DRT action under section 17 can lie. Now, beyond the DRT challenge, is there any other provision? The Act also provides by way of an appeal to the DRAT under section 18. But this appeal comes with a rider that the person who seeks to appeal, rather the aggrieved person, if it's case of a borrower or a mortgagor, he has to make a pre-deposit to maintain his appeal. That pre-deposit is required to be at the rate of 50% of the amount demanded, and the DRAT has a discretion to reduce it to 25%. So section 18, there is an appeal remedy before the DRAT. As in case of any other statutes, all these applications before the DRT or DRAT are to be bound within a time period. Specified period is provided under the statute for approaching the DRT under section 17, approaching the DRAT under section 18. Now, interestingly, similar appeal remedy is there under the RDBD Act in terms of section 20. Now, in section 20 of DRT Act, it provided that if there is a delay, the DRAT will have a right to condone the delay for reasons to be specified. Now, under the SARFAESI Act under section 18, there was no such provision. But section 17 challenge before the DRT as well as section 18 appeal before the DRT, if you see, there are two specific provisions which says that procedures as contemplated under the DRT Act in terms of DRT and DRAT will also apply to the challenges which are made under SARFAESI Act. Therefore, the provisions of DRT Act was read into this. Now, in terms of this, the condonation of delay in appeals under section 18 was also considered by the Supreme Court, saying that reading into the provisions of DRT Act, it held that the DRAT has a power to condone the delay in filing an appeal under section 18 if sufficient cause is shown. So this is, though provision is not there, by virtue of judgment, you have this enabling provision. Now, then what are all the other remedies? There is one specific section which says that there will be a right to compensation in certain cases. Now, so far, with all this experience, I have not come across a case where this compensation was awarded. Of course, one or two cases, there have been orders in terms of cost being imposed when measures are found to be not in accordance with law. But there is a specific provision which says that the borrower is entitled to receive compensation and cost in certain cases when the measures are held to be not in accordance with the provisions of the Act and the rules by the DRT or DRAT, and the tribunals can direct the secured creditor, apart from returning the asset or redelivering the possession, to also pay compensation. This is under section 19 of the Act. So this is all on the adjudicatory mechanism as far as DRT and DRAT is concerned. As I said, section 17 subsection 7 says the provisions of DRT Act will apply in challenges under section 17. Similarly, 18.2 says that provisions of DRT Act will apply in terms of appeals being considered. Then section 17 at length also sets as to what is the scope of adjudication before the DRT. Now, DRT finds that the measures are in accordance, it permits the secured creditor to proceed. Now, if DRT finds that the measures are not in accordance with the Act and rules, it has to restore back possession to the borrower. Now, the original provision had only this provision which said it will restore back possession. Now, over a period of time, the emerging jurisprudence was that the very wordings of section 17 says that any person aggrieved can approach the DRT. Therefore, there were various third parties who are coming before the DRTs. Now, the emerging decisions were that in cases of third parties, DRT doesn't have a power to give me any remedy. Therefore, I will maintain a writ petition. So these were all the different cases which came before the High Courts and Supreme Court. Now, ultimately, Supreme Court said that whatever be it, any person, what kind of grievance you may have, the moment it is relating to an enforcement of security interest, like people who went before a civil court saying that I have a right of partition, therefore you pass a decree for partition, or people who went before a civil court and said that no, I have an interest in the property by way of other transactions, a pre-existing encumbrance or pre-existing agreement, whatever it is. Now, all these things have been negated by Supreme Court in reference to the adjudication which is provided under section 17 as well as the specific provision under section 34, which said that there will be a bar of the civil courts to interfere with any matters which the tribunals are entitled to. Now, to enable this, by way of an amendment, 17 was further amended, subsection to 17 was amended, saying that other than delivering possession, in fact, it can also restore possession to the aggrieved person. It did not, it amended saying that restore possession to the borrower mortgager, to restore possession to the aggrieved person by setting other measure and pass such orders as are deemed necessary. So a more wider adjudicative process was provided to the DRTs under section 17. Now, like I said earlier, by way of an amendment, 17 subsection 4 capital A was brought in to address all the issues in respect of the tenants. Now, the provision also said that there is requirement of an expeditious disposal. 17 subsection 5 says it has to be disposed within 60 days or at the most 4 months. In practice, we all know that this is not happening. DRTs are also turning to be one other civil courts. But of course, at least in a year or two is the time by which it gets to an end. It also provided that specific formats of approaching as well as fees to be paid and remedied before DRAT if there is the applications are not being disposed of within time, so that you can get directions. Now, having said all these things, whether the Act speaks about any areas which are exempted, when we speak about security interest, secured debt, secured creditor, now within this parameter, is there anything which a person will not be entitled to invoke under the SARFAESI Act? This is provided by way of an exemptions in specific under section 31. Now, first exemption which it said is that a lien on any goods, because you need to have relate back this to saying, when we speak about the secured debt, you also have in mind that there is a definition of debt under SARFAESI Act saying that whatever is provided under section 2G of RD Act will also apply. So you will recollect 2G of RDB Act had a very wide definition of a debt. Any person, any liability. So in that set context, now you look at the exemption. Exemption said a lien on any goods, money or security given by or under the Contract Act or on the Sale of Goods Act. So this is exempted. So there cannot be a claim saying that I have got a lien on this, which banks normally claim by way of a statutory banker's lien under the Contract Act. So that you cannot enforce under the SARFAESI. Then second is a pledge of movables within section 172 of Contract Act. This is also exempted. So there cannot be an enforcement of security interest on a pledge of movables within the meaning of section 172. Then creation of security interest in aircraft under the Aircraft Act. Similarly, creation of security interest in a vessel under the Merchant Shipping Act. Then it also speaks about any rights of unpaid seller under section 47 of the Sale of Goods Act. So these are all exempted. Then one more exemption, which is that any property which is not liable for attachment under section 60 of CPC, attachment or sale under section 60, but which says excluding a specific right being created in favor of secured creditor. Now there are three more other important exceptions. One is under section 31G, the threshold limit is specified. It says security interest for repayment of any financial asset not exceeding 1 lakh. So therefore, anything less than 1 lakh doesn't come within the purview of SARFAESI Act. Now, as I was telling about financial institutions, I referred that there is a huge list of financial institutions which are included, namely 196 companies. Now, there again in that notification, there is one provision which the government has made, saying that all these NBFCs, they cannot invoke SARFAESI for a liability less than 1 crore. Now, how this two is going to be harmoniously read is one issue which is there. But under the enactment, exemption provides not exceeding 1 lakh. Then other 31H is again where a lot of judgments which had come is that security interest created in agricultural land. So if there is a security interest created in agricultural land, provisions of SARFAESI cannot be enforced. But this, to some extent, in my personal view, has been completely watered down in 1 or 2 judgments of Supreme Court. I will also try to bring upon it. Then the last exemption is that amount due is less than 20% of the principal and interest. If the original principal and interest is being satisfied regularly, and if the amount due comes less than 20%, SARFAESI cannot be enforced. So this is on the enforcement of the SARFAESI. Now, there are 2 other portions as far as this is concerned. One is central registry. Considering the time, I will try to just rush through and bring in certain valiant features alone. As I said, the Act provides for an establishment of a central registry. What they initially looked at is that registration of asset reconstruction or securitization or creation of security interest. So wherever there is an asset reconstruction which happens from the banks and financial institutions to an ARC company, it should reflect in the central registry. And wherever there is a reconstruction which happens, it should reflect in the central registry. And they also contemplated creation of security interest. Suppose if there is a mortgage. Now, in a case of mortgage, you register with the sub-registrar, and if it is a company, you registered with under the Companies Act with the Register of Companies. Now, in addition to that, central registry was also provided. So this was originally contemplated, but by virtue of now, when this was provided under Section 20, it also said that this registration with the central registry shall be in addition to other provisions under the Registration Act, Companies Act, Merchant Shipping Act, Patents Act, Motor Vehicles Act, and Designs Act, so on so. So this has been subsequently, now the central registry came into place only in 2011, 11th March 2011. This is promoted by Government of India and National Housing Bank. Now by amendment, now the scope of the central registry has been further expanded. Now in terms of the amended provision, what they're looking for is that all kinds of charges which are created or transactions which are reflected has to be registered with the central registry. Now, once this is being made an enabling provision, they have also made a provision in terms of Section 26E saying that priorities can be now decided only based on this registration. So imagine a situation now, the charges or rights created in favor of dues which are payable to government, state, central and local bodies are also to be registered with the central registry. Now, after the coming into force of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, now the central registry is also looked as a information utility under that enactment. So this is the scope of expansion which has happened. Detailed provisions are there as to method of registration of this charge, discharge, like any other case in which you come across with the ROC, how a charge is registered, how a charge is discharged. Once a charge is registered, what is the effect of charge? All those things are also provided under specific provisions, namely Section 22 to 26. Now, as I said, Section 26B to 26E was brought by way of an amendment incorporating under a specific chapter, Chapter 4A. This actually provides that registration of all charges should be there with the central registry, and priority is now decided in terms of 26E. As we said, this challenge whether the sales tax dues will have a priority or the dues of the banks will have a priority is again an issue which is pending before the Supreme Court. Now, this is on the central registry. Now, the other aspect of it is on the securitization and reconstruction companies. Now, for the first time under the SARFAESI Act, this concept of securitization and asset reconstruction came into place. Now, what they mean actually by securitization is nothing but an asset reconstruction is said to be securitization. What is an asset reconstruction is that enforcement and realization, or cases where they provide for rescheduling, or cases where they provide for settlements, whatever it is. Ultimately, if they look at a resolution of an account, resolution of a financial asset is seen as an asset reconstruction. That activity of asset reconstruction is seen as a securitization. So therefore, what they provided is that there will be specified companies. Now, these companies can act as an asset reconstruction company only if it is registered with the Reserve Bank of India. Therefore, first mandatory requirement is that a registration certificate from the Reserve Bank of India is required. Now, secondly, the provision also said that these asset reconstruction companies can carry on business only if they have their self-owned funds of at least 2 crores of rupees. Now, there are various other provisions. Now, this asset reconstruction companies has to make an application to the Reserve Bank. So, Reserve Bank was given all powers in respect of regulation, registration, also powers in respect of cancellation of certificate if there is any violations. Now, for the purpose of registration, certain criteria to be satisfied, like an ARC company cannot be a loss-making company for 3 years. If it is a loss-making company, it is not entitled for registration. Post-registration, if it happens, it is required, it has to be cancelled. So all these provisions have been made as far as the securitization and reconstruction. Now, under these are spoken under Section 3 to Section 12. RBI is given wide powers. Now, delegated powers to RBI is given in terms of managing all these asset reconstruction companies. Now, once the SARFAESI Act came into force and this concept of asset reconstruction company was recognized, the first asset reconstruction company, namely ARCIL, was registered only under this enactment. Now, in continuation of that, today, if my figures are correct, there are about 40 asset reconstruction companies throughout the country. Now, there are various regulatory mechanisms. RBI has given detailed regulations, detailed guidelines running to pages as to what kind of activities they can continue. Now, primarily what these asset reconstruction companies are permitted to do is that they can purchase the financial assets from the banks and financial institutions. They take on assignment what are these non-performing assets which are reflecting in the bank's books. They take on assignment and they try to resolve that. Now, they are also provided specific powers under Section 9 as to, other than enforcement under 13. Section 13 enforcement is also possible by an asset reconstruction company. Other than enforcement, they have specific rights in terms of takeover of management, which is specifically provided to them. And they also have right to reschedule. They also have right to settle with them. So all these things are being provided under specific. So this registration of these companies by these regulations, they have very stricter norms, like they cannot have a sponsors who are interested with the bank or financial institution. So these are all coming into place. Now, other than that, these asset reconstruction companies can also act as agents of banks for recovery. They can act as receivers to be appointed by courts in cases of financial matters. Now, how do these asset reconstruction companies function? Now, functioning is also provided under the Act by saying that they, for one particular account, if suppose there are about 100 accounts taken over from one bank, the asset reconstruction company will manage these 100 accounts by creating a separate trust and having a scheme. So asset reconstruction companies will formulate trusts and manage those trusts. Now, how do these funds come? Now, asset reconstruction company, when they purchase these assets by way of an assignment, they can provide debentures for the value, or they can have an agreement by which they can provide a cash payment at a discounted rate, or they can also provide security receipts. Now, these asset reconstruction companies are permitted to raise funds from institutional buyers as well as a category called qualified buyers. Now, this qualified buyers is also defined under that. Now, qualified buyers who can be is also being regulated by Reserve Bank of India. So, by raising funds through them, the asset reconstruction company issues a security receipt to them. So, in one particular scheme, there is a takeover of about 100 crores of bad debts. Now, for these 100 crores, the bank is provided with 80 crores by raising funds from third parties. Now, those third parties are given security receipt. As and when this resolution happens, the money in proportion will go to the security receipt holders. So, these are all concepts which have come into place. These are all salient features which came into force. As far as this area is concerned, this is selectively lying with certain companies and certain area of practice. But over the period of time, what I look forward is that this is also going to open up when markets are created for these debt securities. So this is all on the creation of this asset reconstruction securitization companies. Then I have a few list of judgments. Now, interestingly, the SARFAESI Act also provided amendments to certain enactments like Companies Act, Securities Regulation Contracts Act, and SICA. Now, SICA has become obsolete because that itself has been repealed. And one more area which you can look at is that bar of civil court jurisdiction under Section 34, as well as overriding power under Section 35. When overriding powers are provided under Section 35, specifically Section 37 provided saying that the provisions of SARFAESI Act will be in addition to certain enactments like Companies Act, SARFAESI Act, DRT Act, everything. So this is one area. So there has been a lot of jurisprudence as far as bar of the civil courts in entertaining any matters where DRT is having a jurisdiction to entertain under SARFAESI Act. So I try to give you a rough outline as to what are all the salient features of these enactments. I will also share my notes with your group admin so that it can be also be given to you. Now I have a few judgments which you will go through that once you have an idea about it. Now, since the time is running short, I thought that we can get into a question answer session. You can raise whatever queries you have, and we can see if we can find solutions to it.
Thank you very much, sir. The clarity in which you took us through the entire act was commendable, sir. So there are two questions already up, sir. I'll just unmute them, sir, so that we can. Sundareswaran, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir. Tell me, sir.
Sir, just a minute. Sir, this is with regard to the interpretation which you gave for Section 31A.
Yes.
See, the facts of the case is that the goods were imported as early as 1981, and the importer gave a personal bond undertaking to pay the duty assessed because as per the Customs Act, the duty is payable the moment the goods comes inside the Indian territory. So he gave a bond to undertake to pay the amount of duty if there is any violation of the import conditions. Right?
Okay.
And thereafter, what happened is that he has violated the conditions. He has not used the goods for the purpose of import, and the property belonging to him was auctioned by the bank. But the bank in the auction notice has clearly indicated that it is subject matter of charge by the Customs Department. Now, can I rely on this 31A, a lien on in any goods, money, or security given? Because it's a security given personally by the importer who had undertaken to pay the duty assessed. Can I?
Now, the point is that, according to you, this lien or a charge on the goods is given to the Customs Department.
Yes.
Whereas exemption is for the secured creditor. Now, the bank who had sold this property is based on the security created in their favor. And that right which the bank would have exercised is not based on the lien in their favor.
But it's an 31A is an exception to the general category, no? It says that...
No, exception for enforcement. If the bank claims a lien and seeks to enforce, it is exception. Now, in your case, you are claiming a lien. Bank is claiming a charge based on some other document.
Yes.
So, therefore, you cannot take a benefit of it.
And I cannot also go for other provisions saying that...
subject to the bank's right, you will have. Suppose after enforcement and bank's realization, if there is any left behind, then you are entitled for it. If it is not so, then you don't have.
Okay. Can I take an alternate plea that the purchaser is not bona fide because he is put on notice that there's already a charge? So the charge is on the property which is auctioned and sold. So
you can take that alternate plea if you are able to establish that your charge was prior in time. Rather, the bank had created a charge much later. So in that case, you can say the person was not bona fide. Having given me a bond and created a lien in my favor, he could not have charged the asset with the bank. So and that will be a valid ground if you are able to establish that you are in prior point.
Thank you, sir. And one more short question.
Yes.
When do the security interest gets activated?
Now, as I said, in terms of 13.2, there is a default and a classification of NPA. This is the primary requirement. Once this happens, then it will be taken.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sundaresh, sir.
Thank you.
Vijay Kumar, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Sir, my question is on jurisdiction point.
Yes.
Sir, I am an arbitrator and award holder.
I
filed an execution petition before the civil court. Now, after a period of 2 years, the bank invoked the provision under the Securitization Act. Whether still the civil court have the jurisdiction to execute my award.
Execution you are seeking by way of sale and attachment sale of a property.
Yes.
That is already subject to a charge in favor of the bank. So, in a civil court, when you seek for an execution by attachment sale, you are supposed to disclose a pre-existing encumbrance. Subject to the encumbrance, civil court can go. Without disclosing, it cannot go. This is point number one. Point number two is that if the bank preemptively goes against the security which they hold, then you will not have a right.
Then we have no right.
Yes. And if in a case your attachment is prior in point of time before the creation of security, then you have a right.
Before my attachment is before the Securitization Act.
But not the act. Creation of security interest in favor of the bank is the essential point.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Thanks. Yes, sir. Sir, I am not able to hear. Audio is very low.
Prithvi has to unmute himself.
Kattapan, sir, can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes,
Yes, sir. This is Mahesh. Sir, good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mahesh.
Sir, good evening, sir. This is this question regarding exemption of agricultural land.
Yes.
Mere classification as an agricultural land is sufficient, or there must be some agricultural activity has to be happened in the land.
See, this issue has been now settled by Supreme Court by a 3-judges bench in the case of Indian Bank versus Papi Reddyar. That was also followed in the case of ITC versus Blue Coast. Now, in both this judgment, what Supreme Court said is that a wide statement is made. But I feel personally, as my viewpoint is that they said the moment a security interest is created, it is not an agriculture property. But as I took you through the provision of law, it is not like so. Exemption of a security interest created an agriculture property, but Supreme Court took the extreme. Now, in addition to that, what Supreme Court has said is that it is not the case of classification. It says that what is the purpose for which the land is purchased and what is the purpose for which the land is put to use actually as on the date of creation of security interest as well as on the day of enforcement. So all becomes material. So the case of ITC versus Blue Coast, that is a case where a huge property of agricultural land, they thought that it is exempted. But Supreme Court took a view on factual consideration that the company has purchased the property for the purpose of putting up a hotel and resort. And a small portion of the property has already been converted into a hotel and resort. Therefore, we will not accept the property to be no more as an agricultural property. They said in the context, the protection of exemption of agricultural property is primarily to ensure agriculturalists are not affected.
But in my case, the borrower himself gave a letter that there is no agricultural activities happening. This land going to be utilized only for the purpose of housing site or
So
any
therefore,
other
bank
purpose.
has every right to enforce. So there is no exemption available.
At present, the same person questioned the challenging the notice.
There is no exemption available. By his own clear statement, it is clear.
Yes,
So therefore, you have to see on the date of creation, what is the statement in the mortgage creation. Like people claim it is an agricultural land, but the mortgage deed will show that vacant land or
Yes,
industrial
it
land
is
or
vacant
something.
land.
So all these things are there. So at the date, on the date of creation of mortgage, what is the nature of covenant or recital he makes to the institution is point number one, or the mortgage creation document. Secondly, on the date of creation, what is the nature of property? Then as on today, what is the nature of property? So all these things matters. These are the two judgments which clearly set forth what it is. If you want, you can just make a note of it. It's Indian
That
Bank versus Papi Reddy.
I read that judgment. I read.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jaykumar, sir.
Sir, very good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Kumar, advocate.
Yes.
I'm seeing you for the first time, listening to you for the first time. I belong to a place called Tanjore where I have seen Kaveri flowing in those ancestral years. I'm seeing the same in your flow of, such a wonderful Kaveri presentation, sir.
Thank you, sir.
My heartfelt congratulations.
Thank
Sir, I have one query. This ARC you were talking about.
Yes.
This ARC mostly in the west part of India, what they are doing is they are identifying very sick units like most of the, units who have gone very sick now, NPAs. They are identifying them and most of the IARCs are having on soliciting arm.
Yes.
And what they are doing is they are approaching the steel units and saying that, say some unit is having some 20 crores.
Yes.
They are just approaching them and they are saying that we'll try to negotiate with the bank and get to a good deal. 10 crores or 8 crores. And what they do is they enter it, the soliciting arm enters into an agreement. The ARC is engaged, deals with the bank and makes a very fantastic negotiation, say for 5 crores or 6 crores. Then they take over and within a month or so, they sell it back to the original buyer or to his nominated person back in 12 crores or 10 crores. This is lifting the wheel, we can definitely see that.
Yes.
If this is what an ARC is intended for, or this is what is expected out of it, or is there any mechanism? Is this what ARC is all about?
No, ARC is not intended for this. The RBI regulations are very, very clear. They cannot go on soliciting. They are not supposed to do all those things. In fact, banks have been repeatedly advised by RBI that whenever they sell these stressed assets, they are supposed to sell it by way of an e-auction or an open auction.
Oh.
So that is what the banks are supposed to do. Okay. And ARCs also, there are clear regulations saying that they cannot get into these kind of deals. But as you said, behind the scenes, this is happening at rampant, making huge profits by themselves.
Yes.
Yes, this is happening. And 1 or 2 cases, there have been complaints also. So if a complaint is given to RBI, RBI will look into it. There have been actions which were taken in respect of one concern in Delhi, which they had their own concern, their own soliciting firm and their own ARC company and all. Now they are very clear. even banks which had ARC companies, the RBI has clearly said that the persons who are there in the bank's board cannot be part of ARC board. The persons who have been part of the management affairs in banks cannot be sponsoring. There should be an arm's length distance. These regulations are there. If you just go through RBI site, you have got a huge regulation, and there is a redressal mechanism also. In fact, one thing which I missed out is good that you have brought it to my notice. When we speak about this redressal mechanism under the SARFAESI, I said a borrower is entitled to redressal for DRT, DR18 and all.
Yes.
This first portion, as regarding asset reconstruction companies and all, the redressal mechanism is completely with RBI to some extent, as regarding third parties grievances. As regarding disputes between the banks, the ARCs, or the qualified investors, all these persons, the redressal mechanism is by only arbitration. So there is a specific provision which says that there will be an arbitration in terms of Arbitration Conciliation Act. RBI has got huge powers. You have to bring it to the notice of RBI, and that has to be taken into it seriously.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jayakumar. Mr. Dinesh?
Hello.
Mr. Dinesh, we are able to hear you, yes.
Okay. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
I have one query, sir, regarding you said that if the borrower has paid more than 80% and the balance left is less than 20% of the total loan,
Yes, sir.
then SARFAESI is not applicable.
Yes, yes.
In my case, I paid more than 80%. And due to some technical flaw in their software, the balance was not got deducted regularly from my saving account, and there was a sufficient balance 3 to 4 times more than the balance left in my loan account. Then when I pointed out many times to the bank, they, owing to some technical reason, it will be done, they go on saying like that. Later, the amount crossed the limit of 20%. Then after around 2.5 years, they started making my account NPA and giving me notice of 13.2 and 13.4 like that. Now should I stick with that your parameter of 20%, or the present balance, which is now more than 20% because of so many debits of that interest portion or charges like that? So what should be, sir, remedy in that case?
Factually, if you are able to establish that you have a case of exemption to 20% by showing that the wrongful acts of the bank, they ensured that it was more than 20%, then you may have a case before DRT, one thing. You may also have a case before the RBI in terms of the Ombudsman scheme redressal mechanism. There is a consumer protection research wing of RBI, which has got some redressal mechanisms. They also effectively treat these kinds of complaints in consideration, mainly on debits, credits not happening, or delayed debits, delayed credits and all, they can work on it. So factually you have to establish. But when I said about this 20%, I also have to give one explanation. See what happens, I have taken 100 rupees as a loan, and it is payable over a period of 5 years. Now, I keep on paying some years. This is a typical case of our housing loans. We keep on paying our EMIs. At the initial stage, the EMIs mostly go towards interest. Principal is very, very less. Now, at the end of 4th year or 5th year, or 4th year, beyond 4th year, now I will think out of 100 rupees which I have paid, I have in fact paid 120 or something, or I will say that I have paid 95 rupees. So I have paid 95% of what I have taken. But this is principal and interest. By the end of this 4th year, what would have happened is 100 is your principal, another 120 rupees is the interest for this 5 years period. So all put together, it is now 225. Out of the 225, you would have paid only 105.
Correct.
So that is the parameter where we have to work out very, very clearly.
No, sir, actually.
All put together, if you are able to establish that 80% is discharged. And if the bank had acted prudently, it would have been less than 20%, then you have a case.
Yes, sir. Actually, to be very specific, I took loan of 12 lakh rupees and the balance left there was less than 2,30,000.
Then you have a case. You have to factually produce all those statement of account before the DRT and establish.
And sir, this is not part of my any query, but of late I have observed that the banking ombudsman is not doing anything, sir, except doing a postman work. They are forwarding our complaint to the concerned bank or institution and forwarding their reply back to us and simply closing the complaint. That is a
Yes.
big problem presently I am facing for last 1 or 2
Yes,
years.
that has been happening. There have been various writ petitions. In fact,
What
Madras
is,
High Court had
what is remedy for that? How this banking ombudsman can be activated to do the
Fine.
desired job, sir?
filed a writ petition before the High Court. There had
Okay,
been
sir.
a few petitions in the last 1 or 2 years, which I have seen. There had been some orders also. The moment writ petition is filed, they also look into it and try to address the situation.
I'm
Only thing
obliged
under
that
the
you are
banking
rectifying.
ombudsman scheme, there is some
Yes.
parameters. It should
Yes,
satisfy
sir.
the parameters. That is only difficulty.
Oh, I'm
Like
very
you cannot
thankful
ask
to
for a
you.
compensation of 1 crore
Yeah.
before a banking ombudsman. They have only powers up to 10 lakhs.
I am thankful, sir, you ratified
Thank
my
you.
view. And I wrote to the banking ombudsman in writing also that you don't do work like a postman, apply your mind to. But they are actually not hearing that.
Yes.
Thank you, sir, so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Mr. Dinesh. Sir, 2 more questions, sir, with your permission.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So my father, Mr. Pramod Chopra, wants to ask you.
Yes.
Sir, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Sir, this is Pramod, sir. Sir,
Yes, sir. Yes.
congratulations for excellent presentation, sir.
Thank you.
My question is regarding, you said that the tenants has now, they have right of determination.
Yes.
What happened when I saw practically in one recently, as a tenant, one
Yes.
sudden day, one morning, Kotak Mahindra Bank came and they said that they have order. There was some magistrate and they vacated him. I had no right, there was no information there's any proceedings are going on or anything like that. And suddenly this morning, the people came along with the court order saying that the building is in possession and they vacated them. And in fact, there are many tenants there, all were closed and shops were closed. The entire building was sealed and taken over possession by the Kotak Mahindra Bank. I just want to know what is this remedy now? You said that as a tenant, they have a right of determination, they can approach the DRT. But by the time my possession is lost, in
Yes.
fact, they find a petition also, the court has said that their possession is gone, nothing can be done. How do we
Yes.
protect this, sir? How do we protect their right? What will happen to that?
See, in terms of Supreme Court judgment also, they say that after losing possession only you can challenge. In cases of physical possession, which the institutions take, your challenge can be to the possession, taking of possession or the possession notice, whatever it is. But after losing possession only you can. Today, there is no provision of law or there is no judgment which says that you have to first protect the possession of the person, then adjudicate the issue. That is not the position as far as SARFAESI is concerned. What only thing which we can put across to the clients is that they should be more vigilant. Now, any SARFAESI measure for your case, you have to just go and see when did the security interest creation happen. If it had happened prior to your coming into possession of the property, you are defeated. If it had happened after you are coming into possession of the property, which means your tenancy or your lease is prior in point of time, then you have a case to fight. So this has to be seen. Then you may also have to look into, in these measures when they take, they issue 13-2 notice. If it is not served on the party, they affix in the property, they publish. So there will be some exercise which would have happened. What happens is many a times, affixture means it is actually to be affixed there to be available for all public to know. But in our own experience, in my own experience as a case of myself, I can even say that we see many cases where banks, they come, affix, take a photograph, the very next minute they themselves pluck it away and take away. But for a record, they will come to the court and say that, yes, affixture is completed. This is my photograph of showing affixture. That is an unfortunate situation. Somewhere the law also has to evolve as to some mechanism. One thing now they are saying is that it has to be placed in the website of the banks and financial institutions. So if that system develops, maybe we will have a case that as and when some issues, you can go verify to the bank's website, find out if there is any measures, actions taken.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Sir, one last question. Satish, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Om Prakash, a very
Yes, sir.
informative and nice lecture
Thank you.
on the provisions of SARFAESI. We are really enlightened. And on behalf of the Madras Tax Board, I would like to thank you for the time you have taken and pains you have taken to do this. I have a small question. What went
Yes.
wrong with the SARFAESI action in Kingfisher Airlines case? Because that is discussed in a lot of forums, but we are not able to get the truth at all in that case.
See, to my knowledge, most of the lending under Kingfisher is concerned, there is no tangible assets for the banks to proceed. Whatever they had about immovable property, certain assets, mobile assets and all,